There were two of them in the garden that evening. A mother and child, Weaver assumed. The child pointed to the sky with her skewered marshmallow aimed directly at the satellite camera. "What's that one doing, Mummy?" she asked. "Oh, that's a shooting star. Devon, make a wish, baby." On the document laid before him, Weaver filled in the child's forename and ticked the box for next of kin. Devon considered her wish long enough for Weaver to wobble his mouse to check the video was still playing. Then, in a low voice, she whispered, "I wish Daddy was still here." The mother put an arm around her and pulled her close. "I do too, baby." With that, the footage ended. Weaver held off putting anything down until he'd done a background check. The child was Devon Blakey, so the facial recognition said, and the mother was Josephine. According to the database, the father and husband was Ray Blakey, financial journalist and hobbyist author. More than that, he was declared missing and had been for a full year. Weaver grimaced. If Ray had been deceased, then he could have written this case off as incompletable and moved on to the next. But since he was missing, then Weaver was obligated to find him, dead or alive. And given how long it had been, dead was more likely. "What's up?" Courtney was peering at him from around their back-to-back monitors. "I heard you sigh." "What case are you working on?" Still leaning, Courtney glanced at her monitor. "A little girl wants her dad to disappear." Weaver scoffed. "What about you?" "A little girl wants her missing dad back." Courtney tilted her jaw. "How long's he been gone?" "As of today, 365 days. Just as Weaver had done, Courtney grimaced. "The duality of children, eh?" "Yeah, I guess we'd better get started then." He spent the next hour researching the disappearance and filing information requests from various agencies and departments. Best Weaver could tell, Ray went missing alongside a whole bunch of other individuals on a wayward bus traveling cross-country. Local authorities investigated and found no trace of the vehicle or any of the 23 passengers seen getting on board by a security camera. The fact that an investigation had already taken place didn't fill Weaver with any more hope. Two details from the report caught his eye, though. Investigators discovered a 20-meter stretch of road along the bus's route that had been blackened and scorched, with all foliage on the roadside having been reduced to charcoal. Since there was no debris or evidence of the bus or any other vehicle found there, investigators attributed the damage to a fire, possibly started by other, unknown parties, and concluded it was irrelevant to their case. Secondly, further along the eastern side of the road, they discovered an unidentified body among the shrub. The coroner's report noted damage done post-mortem by wolves native to the area, but analysis of the body suggested he'd been hit by a heavy vehicle, such as a lorry or bus. Investigators assumed the two were connected, but with no eyewitness reports, and without finding the bus in question, the 308, they couldn't link anything definitively. The 308 had never arrived at its final destination, or even next destinations. All 23 people, driver included, had vanished into the ether. Families of those missing pleaded for more to be done, but with no further evidence, the case was declared cold on August 26th last year. "No witnesses," Weaver muttered. "No evidence, no motive, no nothing." Weaver took some time to stop by his boss's office and make a pitch for this case being unsolvable. "But if you've not found him," the boss had said, "then the possibility still exists and you must pursue it. A wish is a wish, and it's our job to fulfill wishes. Unless, of course, you're defaulting on a case." "No." "Glad to hear it." And he gestured to the door. "Anything remarkable about any of the passengers?" Courtney asked, her eyes fixed on her monitor. Weaver halted his pacing and peered over her shoulder. As far as he could tell, Courtney was watching through a doorbell camera and making notes in a separate document of times her target left and returned from work. Not really, he said, resuming his pacing. I feel like there's little substance to this one despite how many people are involved. Well, instead of focusing on what you don't have, why not follow up on what you do? Which is what? A bus route, a body, and a mysterious burn, none of which are explicitly connected? Courtney shrugged. Better than nothing. After another handful of hours, Weaver managed to secure a copy of a CCTV recording from local authorities. WSH, did you say? The clerk had said over the phone. Never heard of you. This was pretty standard for Weaver. You must have a directory or something, or check with your boss, he said. And sooner or later, the file transfer arrived. As the report had suggested, all passengers were recorded getting aboard the 308 between 10 and 11 p.m. The overnight route would reach Irizarry between 3 and 4 a.m. the next morning. Best he could tell from satellite maps, there were no other stops en route, official or otherwise. The bus was already parked up with its door open by the time the footage began, and the angle made it impossible to see inside. Maybe, Weaver thought, there was already someone or something on board. A bomb might explain the burns, though he'd have expected more damage to the road in that case. He called back. I'm still not sure what you do, the clerk said, even after asking my boss about it. We do a little of whatever's required. The footage you sent me, you wouldn't happen to have more from that day, would you? No, the footage you're seeing is all we have. Weaver sighed as quietly as possible. It's unlikely, the clerk said, given how long ago it was, but you might try the bus station itself. Maybe they've kept the recording. Yeah, thanks anyway. And Weaver hung up. More searching turned up no phone number for the station, and Weaver realized he'd done all he could from his desk. He secured a flight out to Irizarry Airport and worked backwards along the bus route. It was day, allowing him to see the scorched section of road some 2 hours into the journey. Weaver staggered out of his seat, up the aisle, and asked the driver, "What was that back there?" "I don't know, sir," he said, "but it's been there all year." "Looks like a fire or something." "Yes, sir." "Tell me, have you heard of the 308 bus?" At the mention of it, Weaver noticed the driver glance toward him, to look at him from his peripheral vision, before refocusing on the empty, straight road. "Lots of buses in this country, many routes. Sorry. It used to take this one, up until a year ago. Funny you mentioned about the fire happening about the same time." "Oh, yes, sir. Ha ha!" His face was wooden, his posture stiff like a held cat. 308, of course. So you do know it. It disappeared. He was projecting his voice now, loud enough that Weaver noticed some of the other passengers looking over. Weaver narrowed his eyes at him. Yeah, so they say. It was very strange. The driver was shouting by this point, drawing everybody's attention. But they dismissed it as an incorrect filing or like a clerical oversight? Yes, sir. Weaver hadn't read that anywhere, but it could have been theories or something he'd been told by the police. Yeah, Weaver said, probably. Tell me, sir, how did you hear of the 308? Oh, just rumors. The grapevine, yes. And what do you do, sir? I work in resources, finding this thing for one person, securing that thing for another. The driver looked fully at Weaver, if only for a second, with his brows high and his look questioning. Oh, please, sir, if you could take your seat for the remainder of the journey. You are English, yes? Yeah, why? I'll put the football on the television for you. Weaver scoffed, and, unsure what to make of that interaction, did as he was told. Had the driver been hopeful, or was he scared? And what was the shouting for? Before he sat down, he took a quick glance around at the other travelers. Some were minding their own business by glancing out of the window or chatting with their fellows, and a few were watching him. Not maliciously or with any sort of intent, at least Weaver didn't think so. He took his seat and spotted the driver staring him down from the rearview mirror. Weaver took to looking out of the window too, determined not to watch the football even out of disinterest. Hills and trees were rushing by, but all Weaver could wonder was what he'd gotten into. The bus eventually pulled into a stop aptly named The Last Ride Out of Town, even if the name was unwieldy. It was the stop where the CCTV had come from. Weaver waited for the others to depart before he did. The driver was also waiting, smiling and nodding at everyone as they passed, except for Weaver. The driver's face was serious, and he was shaking his head. "Tell me," Weaver said, "you wouldn't happen to know where the toilets are? Long drive and all that." The driver changed to a slow, deliberate nod. Yes, sir. Let me show you the way." Hoping he'd not gotten the wrong end of the stick, Weaver followed the driver off the bus and inside the station. There, half-full rows of seated people checked the overhead schedule screen or fussed with luggage or their children. Weaver and the driver passed them all and entered a walled-off area lined with cubicles and urinals which, at this moment, looked empty. "The 308, Weaver said, ducking to see if the cubicles were occupied or not. "It's as you described," the driver replied, his voice low. "The 308 disappeared, but it wasn't an oversight." Then what happened? He took a conspiratorial glance around before leaning closer. "Nobody is sure. The rumor is that the 308 and all its passengers were dragged to hell by the devil himself." Weaver looked up at him with his brows knitted together. "That's one hell of a rumor." "The route is said to be cursed after travelers killed others there during the night a long time ago." "The 308 was an overnight bus," Weaver said to himself, unsure if he should be entertaining this idea. "Yes, sir. It is said that any who walk the road at night will surely meet the devil." Satisfied all the stalls were empty, Weaver stood up to his full height. "Why were you shouting back there, on the bus?" "The buses have onboard cameras for insurance reasons, and the company directors, they don't like us spreading the story." "Ah, and you believe the story, or is it just hearsay to you?" "If it isn't that, then it's too coincidental to be anything else." "Could be gangs, maybe, preying on travelers and using the story as a cover of sorts." "Gangs in Irizarry? No, the Policia would have them if it were." He said it so confidently that Weaver dismissed it from his mind as well, though he wasn't sure he believed the alternative. The driver, reading Weaver's face, said, "You saw the burns that have lasted for a whole year? The bus and the people were never found? What else makes sense?" Weaver shrugged. It was something to consider, he thought, given how few concrete threads he actually had. "There's nothing else to the story?" "No, sir." He didn't mention a body along the roadside. Maybe it was unconnected. "Well, thank you for your time." Weaver had one idea, and he wasn't sure it was a good one. The follow-up search for CCTV was a dead end, and he wanted to visit the burned site anyway. The problem was that no buses were running overnight from the last ride. Not anymore, as the conductor had cryptically told him, and the site must have been at least an hour's drive away. There was a taxi service that ran out of the last ride, but he'd struggled to convince them to take him that way. "Anywhere else in Irizarry," the driver had offered, "but not this road, not at night." "Then how much for the taxi?" No, the cabbie said, waving his hand back and forth. "We told you, we don't go that way." Weaver shook his head. "I don't want to pay a fare. I'm asking how much for the vehicle, at least for a couple of days." There was a moment of discussion, with the taxi owners giving him side glances before they settled on a price. Weaver paid using his WSH funds, and was soon sitting in the driver's seat. Since he hadn't unplugged it, the fare counter was going up as he drove, and displayed 616 by the time he arrived at his destination. He parked on the grass verge, headlights still on, and walked over to get a better look. The plants, the grass, even the road surface were charred after all this time. It was as if the fire had toasted the soil by the roadside, as there was no grass or weeds or anything growing through. The devil, huh? As the words left Weaver's mouth, a gout of flame burst across the road's width. The force of it knocked Weaver onto his back. His ears rang, and he clutched at his head. Propping himself up on an elbow, he looked to the wall of fire. It was more of an arch of flickering flame, through which Weaver could see a field of orange sands shimmering like a mirage. So close, sweat formed on his forehead, and he could feel the lining of his jacket sticking to his arms. From the threshold emerged a figure. They were tall, easily 7 feet, and they were handsome, Weaver would say, with a naked, athletic form and white wings that had been charred in spots. Weaver squinted against the sun that poured through the gate, even holding up a hand to shield his eyes. "You're the devil, I take it." When he spoke, his voice was like thunder, and although he didn't answer the question, Weaver knew the answer. "I remember this road. Why, I was here just last year, and generations before." "The travelers?" Weaver asked, pushing himself to his feet. "Yes." He clapped and held his hands together. "Of course. They killed another on the road, one they'd taken into their group." "Right. And the 308 passengers?" Theatrically, the devil waved a hand, and the gate was gone, as if it had never been. The Burns and the taxi had also vanished. There was someone else, though. A man with a patched-up backpack over one shoulder. He walked right by, as though Weaver and the devil weren't there. Then again, Weaver thought, if he'd been walking alone along a moonlit road, he'd probably avoid the winged, naked person and the guy in the bomber jacket too. "Who is he?" "Who he is," the devil said, "isn't important." In the distance, from the direction Weaver had come, he could see headlights growing in brightness as they neared. Who he will become, however. It was a 2-lane road. Even though the man walked in the road rather than on the verge, the bus could have moved over to avoid him easily, or slowed, at least. His stomach tight, Weaver watched as the bus maintained its course. The man attempted to leap aside too late. The door side corner struck him, and he rebounded to the ground in a dark spray. The bus slammed on its brakes. It screeched as it swerved towards Weaver. He made to jump aside, but the devil gripped his shoulder, and the bus sailed right through them, allowing Weaver to see the interior and the passengers. It stopped behind them. The door opened, and the driver came running out to find the hitchhiker. "No, no, no," he was repeating as he ran, both hands clawing at his skull. Some of the passengers departed, unsure whether to follow, and watched and whispered with concern. They, as Weaver did, saw the driver kneeling beside the road, beside the body, wailing, "Please, forgive me." A few broke away to join him, to try and help. "My job," the driver was saying. "I'll lose my job, my license. How will I feed my babies from prison?" Some of the passengers crouched next to him, or put a hand on his shoulder. Weaver even stepped closer, onto the huddle's outskirts. Whoever the traveler had been, he was clearly no more. "We can't tell anyone about this," the driver said, his voice wavering. Some of the passengers shared concerned looks, or began expressing dissenting opinions, especially those tending to the dead man. "Please," the driver shouted, his eyes darting from face to face. "I have too much to lose." After another round of glances, the crowd agreed. They dragged the body off the road and into the brush. Their grisly task done, they filed back into the bus. The last one aboard, The driver took a long look back and breathed a sigh before climbing on. With a clatter, the bus came to life and drove off down toward the horizon, where, as had happened to Weaver, an iris of flame opened before them and closed after them. Grass and plant life at the roadside continued to burn after the gate had gone. Out of the corner of his eye, Weaver saw the devil wave again, and the open gate and his taxi were back. Seems like it was an accident, Weaver said. Avoidable, but still. A man died because of one's negligence, and rather than repent, he and the others agreed to pretend it never happened, as if the hitchhiker's life were below theirs, or that nothing of value was lost. They didn't give him a burial. They simply left him for the animals and for the insects. Weaver was silent, considering his next words long and hard. Until, that is, he remembered why he was here. Look, we could stand here and debate the morality of their actions all night, but I'm actually on the clock right now. The devil recoiled at his words, and Weaver wasn't sure whether it was his refusal to engage or audacity that had caused the reaction. See, Weaver continued, unfazed, I need one of those passengers back. Ray Blakey? Sunlight pouring through the gate illuminated one side of the devil's smile. If that is all you wish, then I'll take a soul-for-soul trade. As in, you want me to bring you somebody in exchange? His mind was already firing. You may also offer yourself, of course. Hold on 1 second. Weaver dug out his phone and dialed Courtney's number. The line connected, and Weaver could hear a man shouting and frothing, though muffled and his words were indiscernible. Courtney's voice came through loud and clear over the shouts. Hey Weaver, what's up? Is this a bad time? There came the sound of a car boot closing, and the shouts vanished completely. I've got my man right here, but I've never had to disappear anybody before, so I am considering options right now. Don't worry, I think I've got a solution to both of our problems. They parked up down the road from the Blakey household, Weaver and Courtney in the front, Ray in the back, wearing his sweat and ash-stained business attire. Welcome home, Weaver said, turning off the ignition, glad to be back in his agency car. If they ask, Ray said, what do I say? That it was hell without them, Courtney said, looking over her shoulder at him. Weaver smiled. Go home, buddy. Of course. He opened the door and, 1 foot out, said, I can't thank you enough. Ray exited the car, and the agents watched him hurry up the path to knock on the door. Josephine opened and, after a second of shock, embraced him as if her life depended on it. She shouted into the house, and Devon ran out into her dad's arms. As Weaver watched, he asked, That man we handed over, who was he? Courtney turned her gaze on Weaver. John Liversrich, logistics manager in Corby and father of 3. A pretty normal guy, by all accounts, then. As far as I could tell, but his daughter must have wished him gone for a reason. How come? Do you ever think about the morals of our job? She nodded and looked back to where Ray and his family were going inside. Sometimes, but a wish is a wish, right?